Hola, muy buenos días. Damos la bienvenida a este
Good
nuevo web
morning. We would like to welcome this new webinar
Suelos para el
on
cambio climático.
sustainable management of soil
Doy la palabra.
fertility to mitigate climate change. The floor is yours, Ana. Good morning. It is a pleasure to welcome you to the webinar on the discussion on sustainable management of soil fertility to mitigate climate change. This is an event that is in the framework of the discussions on management, sustainable management of soil fertility for the practical soil from the exchange of ideas, good practices, public policy tools, and dissemination of information, which will facilitate management on the soils to be able to face the challenges and the crisis of fertilizers. In addition, it is part of the initiatives promoted by the World Soil, which has, of course, providing directives and protocol for the assessment, the International Code for Conduct on Sustainable Management of Soils, the technical aspects recommended for the recarbonization, and also the international program for and the international network of fertilizers to improve the fertility, avoid degradation, environmental pollution, and climate change. For this webinar and discussion, we have set forth two objectives. The first one is the dissemination of knowledge and discussion and exchange of ideas in the region and the fertility of soils, with an emphasis in carbon content in the soils and the use of neutronized fertilizers, and also the identification of alternatives for sustainable management of fertility, soil fertility in the recarbonization and use of fertilizers that are nitrogenized. Since in the world level, the nitrate is part of nutritious oxidus is, of course, linked to the sustainable management of soil fertility, and also in the sequestration of soil, of the utilization of neutronized fertilizers. These challenges will be talking about the gaps of information that may create an obstacle in the use of fertilizers, and also to promote the reduction of GHG by sequestering the carbon in the soils. Let us discuss then on these issues to mitigate climate change. My name is Ana Posas, and I will be in charge of leading this meeting. I would like to welcome our illustrious panelists. First of all, we have Natalia Rodriguez, who is the Land and Water Officer of the Secretariat of the Global Soil Partnership, ASLAC. Sol Ortiz, who is the General Direction of Policy in Climate Change Prospecting and Climate Change of SADER Mexico, and President of ASLAC. Ana Posas Monasterio, who is the main Ivan Ortiz Monasterio, Principal Investigator of International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center of Mexico. Francisco Pugno, who is also Associate of Aapresid in Argentina. Madame Vini Saez, who is a part of the Soil Partnership of Fire, and also Francia, Colombia, Sergio de los Santos, who is a professor and researcher of the technical meeting in Mexico. We also have in the area of the Llanos in Colombia, Jorge Chalco, who is UNICET and INTA Experimental of Salta, Argentina. Gabriel de Souza, who is also in Agricultural Officer, Research Division, Ministry of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries, and of the GSP. Javiera Suarez, Facilitator of Soil Community of Practice in FAO. In addition, I would like to thank the representatives and teams in the region, scholars, research, producers, and regional and global organizations, and those of the practice of soils and family agricultural, and to be here today. Thank you all of the present. You are all welcome here. I would like to remind you that we're transmitting this event with simultaneous interpretation into English. You can access it through the YouTube channel of FAO and www.fao/Americas, and also from our Twitter account at FAO Americas. And comment to this event with the hashtag I am for nutrition. We would like to give some opening words from Natalia Rodriguez, Land and Water Officer, Secretary of the Global Soil Partnership. Natalia, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes. Welcome. Thank you very much, Ana. It is a pleasure to be with you today and open this discussion on something so important with this is the fertilization of the soils. I would like to welcome all the participants and presenters of today. The fertility of soil has been historically considered in the production of food with a focus that is almost exclusively in the availability of the macronutrients, which if they were available in the soil, if they were not, they would add practically without considering the specificities of the soils or the specificity of the culture. In the last years, the fertility of the soil is being understood better as an indicator to consider within the health of the soil, and is playing a key role in the nutrition, both of the culture and animals and humans that consume it. And in the recent decades, also it has given us a more environmental activities linked to the soil, the impact that it has in the bad management of the soil and inadequate management. The reactives that we will be referring to in the first session, we have the compartments of the biosphere that has an enormous amount of environmental actions, GHG, the overcoming of critical scales, and the eutrophisation of the management. And we will be seeing then an example that is very characteristic from Colombia. And we have to keep in mind that the main source of this reactive nitrogen is on the soil. The percentage of nitrous oxide is other agricultural and fertilizer. The fertilization of the floor of the soils is fundamental in the world partnership. It shows an imbalance of the nutrients as the main challenges of the quality and the production. And in addition, it provokes an unequal situation in the planet. So we have seen the urgent need to understand the evaluation of the nutrients of the soil and to set forth recommendations of fertilization facing the reality and the needs of the cultures in those soils. And we have to understand the harmonized analysis at the local and domestic level, and also to understand a well-informed decision-making, both policies and incentives, but at the level of the field itself and the farm itself, with the producers taking on fertilization and management of the soils that are sustainable and adequate to the local needs. That's why the World Partnership is developing with the world deep balances of nutrients in the soils. And we're inviting all of you to follow this activity of this alliance, because it's going to have a fundamental role in these informed matters. We must also pay special attention to the producers themselves. They sustain the baseline of the agricultural food chain system. And this is why they are the first ones that have to be aware, trained, and reinforced in their knowledges on the management of the management of the soil, and to guarantee nutrient-filled products, and that also face the degradation of the soil and the effect of ecosystems. This is why it's so important. The topics that we will be analyzing today, it allows us to share all this knowledge with a very ample range of players. As Ana was mentioning at the beginning, the initiative, which has to do with training from producer to producer, it sets forth good practices in the management, in the combination of local knowledge with the last scientific developments. In the same manner, producers must see recompensation of the ecosystemic that their farms produce, both the regulation of the cycles, the water, climate, production of food, and the conservation of climate change that are extreme, amongst other. That's why the initiative that Ana mentioned at the beginning with the recarbonization has as an objective to promote the adoption of sustainable soil management linked to the sequestration of carbon and also the health of the soil, and recognizing that effort, especially of the small-scale producers through economic incentives. We are going to have the opportunity to do today to hear from the experts the role of the fertilizers and the bad management of soil, and we will see this GHG effect. We will see the reactive nitrogen that and the effect of GHG in addition to CO2, and also the practices that are sustainable that will be allied in the reduction and mitigation of climate change and the better resilience in food systems. We will also see alternatives of synthetic fertilizers, and this is key in the global crisis, which has been exacerbated given the prices and the reduction of exports given the war in Ukraine, and also the increase of the gas prices to be able to process raw materials. We will see national and international viewpoints on the soil management through a circular economy, reduction of pollution, and other aspects of impact, global impact that derive from agriculture. We have a program that is very much on time given the current crisis we find ourselves in, and also in the latest innovation and spearheading activities. So we would like you to take advantage of all these discussions that will take place. I wish all of you a very successful event, a fruitful one, of course, and thank you very much to the regional office for Latin America from the partnership, the global partnership, to carry out these dialogues and workshops. Thank you, Ana. The word is yours. Thank you, Natalia. We will continue with Sol Ortiz, who is in the Secretariat of Agriculture of Mexico, and also the president of ASLAC, who will give us a general background on the sustainable aspects of mitigating climate change and prospecting. You have 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Ana. It is a pleasure to share this moment with you and Natalia and all our experts. Good morning to all those of you that are here with us today. And this dialogue in the sustainable management of the soil fertility to mitigate climate change. I welcome all of you here and give you some background of this event. This webinar plus dialogue has a mixed format, which is a novelty in its profile. The players have generated a collaborative with the Office of Latin America and the Caribbean of FAO on aspects related to fertility. And the conversation would be the current situation of the fertility of soil in the region, which was a conversation that took place on the 20th of July. We also had the the topic today, of course, sustainable management of soil fertility and mitigate, and of course, the fertility of soils, which is programmed for the 21st of September. In addition to what we are discussing today, the the regional office of FAO, in addition to the dialogues, we know that as of the end of last year, what has evolved this year, the prices of synthetic fertilizers have triplicated. In some cases, this took place from the beginning of the pandemic, and there are various factors that contribute to the scarcity of fertilizers. Natalia has already mentioned some of them. The problems of the chain of supply supply, natural gas reduction, the prices of energy, the plants that produce that had negative margins stopped the production of fertilizers. And recently, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine exacerbated this issue, since Russia is on the first 5 countries that produces the highest amount of nitrogen fertilizers, and it is the highest exporters of fertilizers on the planet. Although there are important efforts in various countries that depend on these inputs to overcome the scarcity, these present already challenges that the region has been facing given climate change. Because of the scarcity and the significant increase of prices of this product, it is key for the production, agricultural production in many productive countries. Consequently, there is a reduction of application of fertilizers, and this could contribute to reducing the yield and quality and production of food. Notwithstanding this crisis, it could represent an opportunity for the implementation of practices that could promote the fertility of soils. It has been promoted and have not been acquired or included in the process of producers. That's why many producers are facing this crisis are turning their view towards these alternatives to face head on these challenges and finding more effective use for fertilizers. And this is what is the objective of these dialogues that Ana has already referred to. In combination with this effort, the Alliance for Latin America and the Caribbean has already planned to generate webinars on the sustainable management of soil nitrogen and to reduce GHG. Although we know that there is an interest in capturing carbon, but we know that sustainable management and efficient use of nitrogen are fundamental to reduce emissions. We recognize that agricultural activities are not the generators, main generators of GHG, although this sector generates considerable gases that are not CO2. These gases are not methane and nitrous oxide, 265 and 28 times higher than those compared to CO2 in a scenario that's projected towards 100 years to the future. It is a sources of nitrous oxide and the overuse of fertilizers, and not only to promote the documentation that is already available, but also to carry out this webinar that was programmed for the 25th of August. Since this topic and the topics of dialogues that are very much related to this topic, we decided to carry out a joint organization of this webinar, and this is why we're here in this event, which jointly puts together these efforts. And also, almost to conclude, I would like to underline what ASLAC is doing. Natalia has already mentioned, which is to promote practices that contribute to the adaptation and mitigation of climate change. We are carrying out Rec Soil in the region. In Mexico, for example, with the support of FAO, with the Office of Mexico, Rome, and the Secretariat of ASLAC,
También la FAO a través del ASLAC
to face climate change. So promoting the technical cooperation at the regional level in soil management, which is a cooperation for climate change in agricultural systems with emphasis on soil and water, which in this project has we have surveyed more than 360 practices of sustainable soil management through surveys to 21 countries in the region, and we are validated more than 40 of these practices in programs, in 8 pilot programs, utilizing the sustainable soil management protocols. It also has a document that Natalia has already mentioned, which is very relevant for the webinar of today, which is the conduct of fertilizers in the efficient use of these. And also, and not less important, I would like to underline the progress that has been done on programs in management of soils in this region. This program seeks to program the scaling in sustainable management of soils and training and creation of capacity building in farmers, from farmers to farmers. So to conclude with these opening remarks, I would also thank all the presenters that will be sharing their knowledge and experiences on topics related to soil fertility. And also I would like to thank and also add to the thanks that Ana has provided and the teams that have come together to participate in this seminar, and to my colleagues for Latin America and the Caribbean, Carolina Olivera and Juan Rey, and all the collaborators of the team of the Regional Office for FAO Latin America and the Caribbean, Javiera Suarez, and particularly Ana Posas, who is our moderator. Thank you very much, Ana, for everything you have invested in this event. I trust that it would be extremely useful because it is on time for the crisis that we are facing. We wish you great success, a great knowledge acquiring event, and thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Sol and Natalia, for inaugurating this event. We are faced with a great challenge. The climate change and the degradation of soils aggravate the situation in Latin America and the Caribbean. The management of carbon and nutrients in our soils, the methodologies that we will be following both for the webinar and the discussion. We will have 3 presentations. Each one will be 15 minutes. The objective of this part of the event is to provide you with a summary of technical essential aspects to talk about the context of what I've set forth and the sustainable management of the fertility of soils, reducing GHG, at the same time optimum usage of the fertilizers. At the end of these, we will select questions from the audience for which we would invite you all to participate actively and to describe the comments on YouTube. Please indicate your name and, if possible, who the question is dedicated to. At the end of this dialogue, we will have some questions that we would like to ask you based on the questions that we will have on the panels. We will have a 30-minute recess, and we will present during that recess 4 videos on the importance of the protecting the fertilization, the conduct code, and also to maintaining the soils healthy as a basis for a better environment and nutritious results of food, and also climate change. After the recess, we will continue with the second block, a discussion on exchange of experience. We will be talking on the presentation of practical aspects related to the event, on the fertility of soils, and mitigating climate change. We will have 5 experiences on sustainable management on presentations of 5 minutes each. The presentations will set forth 4 major aspects: the problems related to learning processes and the next stages for implementation. After these experiences, we will have a short presentation of the experiences on soil practices. Then we will have a cycle of questions, or a round of questions and answers from the audience. We will ask you once again to set forth your questions in the YouTube chat, write your name, and also indicate who the panelists you're directing the question to. After the cycle or round of questions, we will have some conclusions and the closing of the event. We will begin with the presentations of this seminar, which is going to be linked to Iván Mortín Monasterio, who will be presented on nitrogen in production systems, effects on the environment, human health, and climate change. Iván, the floor is yours. You have 15 minutes.
Por favor, abra su micrófono.
Please open your microphone. Eh,
Yes.
Muchas gracias por la invitación a
Thank you
participar.
very much for the invitation to participate. For me, it is a pleasure to be here with you today.
Con la presentación.
Well, I'll start with my presentation, and here we show how most of the nitrogen fertilizer is applied in developing countries, 77% of the total, while in previous year it was in developed countries. And the estimate of the total use of nitrogen fertilizer is about 115 million tons of nitrogen. This figure maybe doesn't say much, but if we compare it against what it is naturally fixated in all of the ecosystems in the planet, this number is even greater. In other words, we're fixing more nitrogen as fertilizer than what all of the ecosystems at a world level are doing. So how did we come to this point then? Well, it was more or less in 1908 when we invented this process of Haber that allows for the ammonia synthesis. And this synthesis of ammonia was what led the production of fertilizers, but also it was useful for the production of explosives. So then after the Second World War, you had all of these plants that were built for producing explosives for the war, and they were suddenly available for the use mainly for fertilizers. And in this chart, we can see in blue how we started having an important increase in the use of fertilizers roughly in the 60s. In this study, Erisman and his collaborators did a very interesting analysis where they argue that thanks to the invention of this Haber-Bosch process, it's possible that about half of the population is present today in the planet. But where are we using these fertilizers, this nitrogen fertilizer? So this is recent data from 2022 that present data from 2018, where we see that cereals, grains are the main consumers of fertilizers. First, we have maize with 20% of nitrogen. Then we have wheat with 18%. And thirdly, we have rice with 16%. And we put them all together, they are all consuming about 54% of all of the nitrogen at a world level. So if we have limited resources to increase the efficiency, we see that the biggest part of the nitrogen is used in countries, in developing countries, and it is used for in crops such as cereal. So this is where we can set a priority to have an important impact in the efficiency of the use of nitrogen. So in this chart in green, we see the bars with the average use of nitrogen in the different crops. And here we wanted to show that the grains are the ones that use the highest dose of fertilizers or nitrogen fertilizers. And these average values hide see a particular situation. We have regions where we applied excessive levels of nitrogen, while we have other areas such as Africa, where we applied doses below required or we under-fertilize. On this chart, we see a recent study that shows that the efficiency of the use of nitrogen in grains is 35%, 35% at global level. So we have differences in different countries. United States has 41%, India only 21%. So from every 100 kilograms of nitrogen that are applied by farmers, only 35 is retrieved by the plant. So what happens with the nitrogen that is not retrieved by the plant? So here we have a nitrogen cycle that is very simplified, where it is showing us with those red lines the different routes by which we lose nitrogen. All of these routes, all of these pathways have a negative environmental impact, except for N2, which is non-reactive nitrogen that does not create problems in the environment, but all of the other ones do create problems in the environment. In the case of ammonia, NH3, that manure, for instance, is one of the greatest issuers of this gas, apart from other fertilizers. This gas is volatile mixed with clouds, and wind down is it's falling down to the earth, fertilizer different ecosystems, and within the ecosystems we have some species that respond better to nitrogen fertilizers, so which tend to dominate and displace other species, affecting biodiversity. When we have a reduction of the plant biodiversity, we see we also have a reduction in the insect biodiversity. Also, we've seen that this rainfall with ammonia can modify the soil pH, and they can affect some plants, making them more susceptible to frost and pathogens. So let's go now to NOx. Just like ammonia is volatile, mixed with clouds and causes the same problem of biodiversity, but also has an important role in acid rain that has a negative effect on plants. And it has a third negative role because it participates in the formation of tropospheric ozone. We have the good ozone and the bad ozone, and this ozone is the bad ozone in, let's say, Mexico City, which is considered a pollutant and affects human health. Let's go to nitrous oxide, N2O, together with methane and CO2, are the ones considered to be the main greenhouse gases that are contributing to the increase of temperature and climate change as well. Also, nitrous oxide has a negative effect in this case on the good ozone, the ozone we have in the stratosphere, that is useful as a filter for the UV radiation. If we don't have this filter for that ozone layer, then UV radiation, is going to be applied in high dose, and therefore we're going to have an increase of skin cancer. Another loss of nitrogen is through nitrate lixiviation. We see a farmer's land being irrigated. The excess of nitrogen will just drain in this way. And here we see an image from the satellite from the northwest of Mexico in the Yaqui Valley. In this study, we show that every time these farmers fertilize the wheat crops, there is some sort of growth of algae in the sea. So this growth of algae, once they have completed their cycle and decomposed, they consume the oxygen in the water, and the fish that we have in this area die of asphyxiation. And this is a problem at a global level that takes place mainly in the Northern Hemisphere. As people also go into the sea, when these algae growth are happening, we can have problems of gastroenteritis, problems in skin conditions, and conjunctivitis. Here we see another image of the Yaqui Valley. We have a grid of 2 by 2 each square, and the colored squares are places where we took samples of well waters, and the ones in yellow have levels within allowed limits, but orange are already above allowed, and then we have a red one, which is 10 times what is allowed. The problem of having nitrates in the water is that in babies younger than 6 months, we can have the syndrome of the blue baby. They block the hemoglobin absorption in the blood, and babies turn blue because it also affects thyroid glands and the incidence of birth defects, and also increases the incidence of other diseases. Agriculture in the end is interested in the economic part, of course, and from that perspective also we could be saying that we have an incentive for reducing the doses of nitrogen, because this is the main production cost in a supply that has a very low efficiency of only 35%. In the areas where we over-fertilize, we have the opportunity of increasing the efficiency. It doesn't affect the yield, and in that way we can reduce the cost and increase their profitability. How can we achieve that? In agriculture generally, in agronomy, we see 4 strategies of identifying what is the right source of fertilizer that we should be using. The dose is about not applying more or less, and the right time. Also, from the right place for nitrogen can be used in a more efficient way. So I also love to see and analyzing the efficiency from a cycle of nitrogen cycle, where we break down the different processes that take place in this nitrogen cycle, and we identify some agronomical practices that allow us to increase the efficiency of nitrogen, analyzing these different processes in the soil. So we have a publication that is quite recent, and I thought it was very interesting. And the conclusions they have is because this was written by scientists that participate in the private sector fertilizer production, also in the public sector, and the members of the academia. And they include the fertilizers play an important role in the food safety and human nutrition. And then the next 10 to 20 years are critical to carry forward this transition from current production systems to production systems that minimize environmental impact. All of this includes the organic sources as well as inorganic sources. And instead of looking for a more economic dose for farmers, we need to find a social thing that considers not only the needs of the farmers, but also environmental and societal needs. And how can we achieve these? And they suggest public partnerships focus on sustainable models that generate added value to the nutrient chain that will benefit both agriculture as well as consumers. They also propose that the research needs to be more focused on the solution of problems and combining excellence in science with innovation in the business world. So in this way, the solutions generated can be applied soon. And lastly, public policy should be based on evidence in order to design the path that we need to follow, which should be including national realistic goals, progressive regulations, and incentives that will support innovation in the technology for businesses. And my last slide here, I'd like to set an example of what we should do, which is innovate ways of increasing efficiency. And this example is an example of research. I believe this is an excellent example of innovation where we are transferring genes from one distant relative of wheat, a wild variety of wheat, to commercial wheat, because this wild cousin produces exudes of the root that inhibit nitrification, that allows us to use nitrogen in a more efficient way. In fact, there are chemical commercial products in order to inhibit nitrification, but we are achieving this through a biological process. So we already proved that we can do this, but we're going to be seeing more research so we can confirm this in different parts. And with that, I finish my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Ivan, for sharing such critical data that really call to action and take measurements that will reduce the environmental impact and social impact as well, and also the profitability in the agri-food systems and the impact in ecosystems in general. So we continue with the panel members. We'd like to give the floor to Francisco Puño, who has prepared the presentations and nature-based solutions in order to optimize soil fertility and the use of fertilizers. Go ahead, Francisco, you have 15 minutes.
Si puedes poner, perfecto, gracias.
Thank you very much.
Bueno, buenos días.
There we are.
Gracias
Hello, good morning.
Gracias a Aapresid.
Thanks to our team. Thanks everyone for the invitation, for this participation and this important conversation. I am Francisco Puño, and I am to give a presentation as a farming producer in the wetlands of Argentina. I work in a family company called Aapresid that has as a main activity extensive agriculture under regenerative models of soil. And today, what is summoning us today is this title of nature-based solutions to optimize the soil fertility and the use of fertilizers. And for this, I wanted to start with this very cruel and very real problem, and this really problematic situation that has been mentioned in this conversation already, which is basically two main problems that we have in the current productive systems worldwide, which are the predominance of tillage on the one side and the simplification of the productive systems, leading us to two consequences that are very, very severe, dramatic, and important, which are the degradation process that soil has been suffering in general, and on the other side, the big dependence that most systems have in terms of external supplies to maintain the productivity level. And based on this, the beginnings of our productive activity in agri-tech 10 or 15 years ago, we set ourselves the problem of how to change this way of producing, even not wanting to resign in productivity. We wanted to see how could we produce more or just the same, but keeping soil or improving soil. So the answer we have it around us. This thing of starting presenting, paying more attention to nature and its processes, and looking to imitate nature and trying to make systems to go back to be more complex, also in that match with nature. And an answer that we saw as a possible answer to implement this and execute this in the field is this change of paradigm on thinking the production agriculture as regenerative agriculture. And it is important to highlight that we don't consider at that time, even today, to use external supplies. What we do believe is that we need to give a rational and efficient use of these resources. And based on this same idea, we got ourselves to the task and we started implementing these productive systems that are sustainable in regenerative agriculture or direct sowing. And we cannot talk about fertility, which is what summoned us today, if we do not talk about systems. And that is why I wanted to mention some aspects that are very important and fundamental for these type of systems. Firstly, this thing here on the slide, the no removal of soil. In a productive system, we're never going to be using any type of tillage, not even in situations that are specific. So that already is the main thing. On the other side, the progressive implementation of rotation with the objective of creating greater intensity and diversity as much as we can, and from the agroclimatic region that we are all producing. In our case in particular, the objective of the intensity in the rotation is to manage to get the biggest amount of active photosynthesis or evapotranspiration in the year, trying to generate live carbon, and this with two big consequences that are direct. On the one side, the food that we need to generate for the biology of the soil. I don't know if you can perceive in this picture that I have here on the mouse, that thing right there, it is biogenic compound that is added on, that is derived from the food of worms. But the soil biology, both micro, meso, and macrofauna, needs to be fed. And therefore, we believe that the role of the intensity in the rotation is fundamental. This is also associated to the sequestration and the contribution of carbon, which is a rotation with more photosynthesis and more roots throughout the year. And we translate this in more sequestration and contribution of carbon to the system. Two data I wanted to mention in our productive systems, actual reproductive systems, are on the one side, the intensity we have managed here. This allowed us in the last few years achieve that more than 90% of our surface will have more than 2 crops per year. And on the other side, we can also get an increase of 70% on the carbon contribution to the soil and the system, comparing this to a typical rotation of our area. So in line with this, and always from this systemic, comprehensive vision, we cannot neglect the part of the system with just the intensity of rotation without mentioning the diversity in this rotation. So the more species we can incorporate in time and space in our rotation, of course, we're going to have greater exploitations that we can have based on these ecosystemic functions and also synergies that are pertaining to the nature as well. In a particular case, and as an example, today only in farming we have 10 different varieties included in our rotation. So you can just get an idea. In this area, we want to use between 3 and at most 4 varieties in one rotation. So that is the change we want to find from the very beginning, and we've been improving this continuously in order to achieve the objective stated for this aforementioned situation. And we'll derive in this big topic, going back to fertility. Looking at fertility as a whole, as I put on the slide, this means that at some point the producers or technicians believe that physics and the biology of the soil were as compartments or separate, while there's a lot of evidence that we have an interrelation and a dynamic that is phenomenal between all three variables. So even with some evidence, the biology of the soil can be the mother of both physics and chemics of the soil. And based on this, then I relate this to the fundamental aspects that have been mentioned by reproductive systems. These were the intensity and the not tillage. Because the first thing we're doing with this type of systems is promote the biological activity and, of course, generating the conditions so all of that complex interaction of the rhizosphere will work. Of course, involved in a number of natural processes, but mainly, and today this is what is summoning us, it is the cycling of nutrients and how these nutrients become soluble. On the other side, what's very important in this type of productive schemes is the efficiency in the use of nutrients, because as we mentioned, Ivan, in the previous talk, we have some excess of nutrients in the system by different ways. And in this type of systems, we have a great participation of nutrients in an organic way introduced within the tissues of plant and animal tissues, and not inorganically distributed in the soil. So it is important to bear in mind that while having live green systems, most of the nutrients are in the system organically with a slow release through the mineralization of these processes. And here, we need to touch on a fundamental topic about these type of systems, which is the incorporation that we have achieved of leguminous plants that fixate nitrogen through the symbiosis with bacteria. And this is important in the system, and how important legumes became in these last few years in this winter batches coverage, because we were not producing this, so we didn't have live crops for that, for two direct impacts. One, in the crops after the leguminous. In this, we have a service crop, and also the replacement of inorganic nitrogen with a fertilizer compared to the biological nitrogen contributed by this leguminous. This is seen many times in the later crop after the leguminous plant, as well as the following crop with some remnant of that biological nitrogen. And secondly, the impact that adding this type of nitrogen has in the construction of organic matter of soils, because if we only add carbon contributions that are not balanced with nitrogen, it becomes very hard and pretty much uphill to manage to improve the levels of organic material. And lastly, I would like to mention that all of these practices are not standing on their own, but they're complementary, and they're all necessary for the systems to achieve high productivity, but preserving and improving soil. And it's important to stress that we also use fertilizers from inorganic sources as a complement of these type of practices, and with an efficient use and a rational and strategic use as a measurement that is important. And as we mentioned before, the importance of this type of use in external supplies. Some challenges that we are proposed by these type of topics are the deepening in the knowledge, be that the biology of the soil, where we are making a notable exploration of the topic at a global level. Also the nitrogen dynamic of this biological nitrogen, which is so hard to understand. Improvements in the diagnosis for fertility, be that as an example, the anaerobic nitrogen or current technologies that are potential and that could come up, variable fertilization or precision agriculture as an improvement in efficiency of the use of
El
fertilizers,
posible uso de
the
enmiendas
possible use of complementary or organic amendments, and also the adjustment of management practices that make us improve day after day our productive systems, because we are in a system that, while being innovative all the time, we have challenges of finding the way of making some things that are not proven
y como
previously.
cierre,
And as a closing,
nosotros desde Agritest
from
creemos que
Agritest, we believe this is the path to agriculture. We believe that we need to get yourself imbued in this. We want to get contagious, because the continuous improvement of productive systems is totally dynamic and it's interactive. So thank you so much for your attention. That's my email right there. And any questions you want to have. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Francisco, por
Thank you very much, Francisco, for showing that sustainable agriculture is possible, that we can restore, and that nature offers us options to reach this purpose, and also for inviting us to help us to continue improving. In the third guest, I have three messages. The first one, we invite you to participate actively and leave your questions on the chat with your name, and if possible, with the name of the panelist you're asking the question to. Also, remember to comment also through social networks with the hashtag #IamHealth, hashtag Yo Soy, and I am for Nutrition. And also, we have more than 450 attendees to this event. Thank you very much for being here with us. Finally, we go directly with our third participant talk, if you will, Vanessa Sainz. She will present the diagnosis of fertility and efficiency in the use of nitrogenous fertilizers. The floor is yours, Vanessa. You have 15 minutes. Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you, and thank you for this invitation. And I will set forth my presentation now. Today, I would like to share some reflections on the fertility of soils, their diagnosis, and the efficient use of fertilizers.
Listo. Entonces, los suelos realizan funciones.
So soils carry out functions that are related to, and it would not allow for the continuance of life in our planet. However, I believe that the most important functions that we feel closer to is the production of food. 95% of our food come from soil, and the 99% of the calories that we ingest, and 93% of the proteins that comes from animals and plants, and they are related or depend directly or indirectly from the soils. So what makes this possible, this formation possible, this recycling, storing and retention of nutrients in soils? It is fertility of soils that allows this to occur. As my colleague said previously, Ivan, it refers to properties, three very important properties in soil, which are the properties of physical, chemical, and biological that allow for an enormous variety of processes, like the decomposition of the organic aspect, which is always linked to the biodiversity of soil. However, fertility is a quality that we're losing approximately a third at the world level, and this has already a certain level of degradation, mostly due to agricultural non-sustainable practices, such as intensive use, the reduction or non-return of organic matter to the soils, the unequal use of fertilizers, and monocultures or crops, and that the soil is a lively and not renewable in the scale of human life, and the lack of understanding of keeping soils healthy, and something that is very important. This is a a crop that or something that is below our feet. It's nothing that we can see. It's hidden. So it's like the ocean. It's not like the ocean or animals. It goes through different factors. One of the main challenges that we see, or threats, if you will, is the inequality of nutrients. There are various contexts where soils that are impoverished or depleted, and others have an overload. While in some regions we have areas in which they are depleted, they given deficiencies. These deficient or depleted soils can produce crops that are impoverished in nutrients that are in the plants for more than 70 years now. It's no longer the same. It's not as it was before. We had nutrients or crops of better qualities. The deficiency in the soils have produced low yields, crop failure, less nutritious food, and this takes us to the deficiencies in animal and human nutrient deficiencies. Agriculture today is more focused in the production, in the yield, and increasing yield, and higher yields must be distributed in a higher amount of plants, reducing the nutritious result. And we must focus not only in the quantity, but rather and also in the quality. In other regions of the world, as we know, as my colleague was referring to, Ivan, there are other regions. There is an overload of nutrients. As an example, 50% of the nitrogen that is applied on soils end up escaping as atmospherically as nitrous oxide, which is linked to GHG, as was presented by the Professor Monasterio. It creates phreatic leaching and enters into the streams or coastal waters. The contaminations of oceans comes from 80% comes from non-sustainable agricultural practices. So what can we do? There is very clear evidence, as was presented by my colleagues previously, and also in other practical cases that will be set forth today. The sustainable management can produce 58% more food. So there's a great amount of things that can be done, strategies that can be followed. And one of them, or one of the main ones, is, sorry, my computer is blocked somehow.
Una disculpa, voy a compartir otra vez.
I'm sorry, I have to apologize. I have to share this again. Something happened.
Entonces, como les comentaba,
So, as I was mentioning, part of the solution is the comprehensive management of soil fertility. There are tools in the comprehensive fertility of the soil. As I said, it is one of the most important alternatives that we have for adequate management of nutrients, managing the source. There are various aspects, the management of doses, and the optimum adjustment of the needs of the crops, and also managing the moment, when is the best season, when is the divided application, synchronization of the crop demand, and also obviously the location, utilizing fertilization when it's possible. We can adapt this to the needs of the different farmers and different types of agricultures that are being applied in different regions in Latin America. And of course, we have more and more solutions based on nature, as was set forth, a very good example by my previous colleague. And also there is a great amount of things that can be done from the addition of organic material on the soil, legumes as fertilizers, biofertilizers, biostimulators, the diversification of crops, and also meteorological alerts, for example, that can be used. There are other tools. There are initiatives at the regional level that are underway, which has to do with the climate. We can generate sensors of greenery, humidity, nutrients, and there are other models, calculators, etc. But in order to implement each one of these strategies, it is fundamental to understand the diagnosis of this field, of the fertility of the soil. This can be done on the field, in a lab, or in a greenhouse. This is a very broad topic. I do want to mention some things that are very important from this standpoint. So why do we carry out a diagnosis of our field? Well, to understand to improve the quality, to improve the cost-effective production or yield, and to produce sustainability in a sustainable manner. And why, if you do not attain the yield expected, how do we tackle that hand in hand with the idea of sustainable management? This can have external factors, climate, biotic, chemical, mechanical management, or they can have internal factors that could be excess or over watering or under watering, and this results in deficiency and toxicity and unbalance. So what do we need to observe? The aspect of the crop in general, in order to generate a diagnosis of the quality of the soil, understand the population density, the topological aspects, the water quality, etc. Another important aspect, and that's the next step after this, is the lab diagnosis, a comprehensive understanding of the soil fertility, because this gives us an idea of the capacity our soils have to provide the nutrients that need to be developed. It's not only the chemical analysis that's important, but it's important to understand a comprehensive analysis that considers the physical, chemical, and biological properties of the soil, which are fundamental, and also the significance of the biodiversity of the properties, the biological properties, and also the residual effect of the fertilizers, to understand and whether organic or inorganic. And why do we need this? To indicate a certain essential elements and to correct the deficiency as fast as possible. And what is measured? These are indicators of the nutrimental availability, the capacity that soils have to generate essential nutrients. It is very important to understand that the interpretation of these analyses must be correct, because sometimes this generates confusion both to the farmers and the technicians. So what do we need? We need interpretation baselines. We need to understand how the system works. We need to create, of course, understand what the physical, chemical, and biological theories of the analysis of soil fertility means. And this is why it's so essential to have technical support to ensure that the producers and farmers understand how to manage the agronomic processes and the principles to correct and understand when you have an inadequate analysis, this can be an issue. So it's important that we can help the technicians and producers and farmers to have a representative pre-analysis of their soil. So what are the tools that can help us to avoid the nutritional imbalances? So you know that there's an international code of conduct for fertilize and manage sustainable management of soils. And these has recommendations for a broad use of users, different sectors of government, industry, the scholars, of course, for the producers, and also the users, of course, the farmers, that are all related directly or indirectly to the use of fertilizers. So which are the challenges that we face in order to better understand the fertility of the soils? We need to be able to monitor the soil. We need to have methodologies that are reliable in order to carry out a comparison of the different results. Methodologies that are harmonized. So Latin America already has a path forward. Many are part of the laboratories of soil, global soil laboratory network, and the Latin American wide, and of course the strengthening of national capacities. And for that, the region already has the implementation of soil doctors, which is a system for capacity building from producer to producer. It requires not only more food, but better food. We need to improve or better use recycled nutrient sources. Remember that we are in the avoid overuse, and we are in conflict, health conflicts, and social economic conflict, and of course are in the scenario of climate change in the world, and therefore we are facing various complexities. I would like to talk about some global symposium on soils for nutrition, which was carried out a few days ago. We need to know where the nutrients are, how those nutrients are, and to increase its context with the associated external factors. It is important to understand where they are located. It is very important also. A great deal of research has understood that the soil biocertificate is linked, and we will have more examples on that later on. More than a corrective aspect, we need to have a preventive and sustainable management of soil, and this continues to be the most cost-effective path to take in order to take on the management of soils. There are three ideas that came through: innovation. We need new sources that are more friendly, cheaper, and that are linked to the mitigation of climate change. We need to have research based on needs that are specific and focused on the fertility of soil, and we need to find recycled sources. It is very important to set forth strategies in order to implement biofertilizers, biostimulants. The waste is not waste. We need to reutilize these sources to continue providing nutrients to soils and support circular economies. The evaluation of the quality of these fertilizers is something that we can no longer leave aside. It is important to understand what we're putting in our soils. Are we complying with the norms? Why? Because it can generate health problems. Just as an example, for example, the content of heavy metals that some mineral fertilizers can have. Our region already has countries that are part of the International Network on Fertilizer Analysis, or INFA. And so this is my last overhead. Well, these are some reflections I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Vinisa, for setting forth the significance of the quality of soils, not only on production, but also on the quality on the food that we are consuming. The region already has tools as a codes, the efficient use and responsible use of fertilizers, and also there has an articulation of different networks, such as those that you mentioned, the laboratories for the analysis on the quality of fertilizers, and also to set forth the significance on the generation of building capacities as the soil doctors that you mentioned. All your presentations have helped us extensively to understand the management, sustainable management of the fertility of soil, the effective use of fertilizers, and of course, the availability of nutrients on plants and the soil. So now we will have a section of Q&A. I would like to begin with Dr. Ivan. Dr. Ivan, there are two specific questions for you. I will set them forth so you can summarize your responses, please. Could you please refer to the wild wheat as inhibitor of nitrification? And the second one is if you are already applying on cereals that induce a substantial increase and optimizing nutrients, what has been done in that from that standpoint? Can you please answer those questions? The first one, if the Limios racemosius is a scientific name, and the presentation, I did a referral of Dr. Subarao, which is in Japan. And if you access that reference, all the data is there available to you on that entire process and that research project. Now, the second question was on the effect of endophytes. Yes. I'm not sure what the question is exactly. Can you be a little bit more specific to what microorganism are you referring to? It says basically, can you mention the endophytes in cereals that produce an increase in yield? In any case, we're going to ask the person that was asked to be more specific on the question, and then we will set it forth, Doctor.
Francisco, hay una pregunta para ti también. Y es sobre el hecho de si las soluciones que están
There's a
implementando
question for you as well. If the solutions that you're implementing in your field have anything to do with agroecology, that's the first. Second is, they're asking about the varieties you're using for rotation. And there's a third that doesn't have to do necessarily with fertilizers, but as options based on nature, which is the fact that the use of pesticides and herbicides, such as glyphosates, and if we are using any alternatives on. Perfect. Thank you, Anna, for the questions. First, regarding agroecology, we could talk at length, but we do consider ourselves to be agroecological producers. And that is the question. The serious definitions of agroecology, I believe, include everything we do and we promote in our systems. So, answer is yes. For that person asking about the varieties that we incorporate in our rotation, of course, in the campaign, I can mention these two you mentioned that include both the service crops or coverage or harvest crops only in agriculture. These are rye, turnips, peas, wheat, barley, sativa, avena sativa, and rice. So incorporating these varieties mean that we try several alternatives that are not as successful for whatever reason. Just to name a few: production of foraging seeds such as locust or linseeds, lupin, lentils, clover, etc. And all of this without including the farming part, which of course incorporates pastures and varieties that add to this mentioned variety. Lastly, regarding the consultation of pesticides, we use pesticides. I believe I was very clear on my talk that we believe that we cannot preside on these type of systems by maintaining high levels of productivity, residing of fertilizers from inorganic sources as well as phytosanitary products. We do believe, however, and what we do see is that we can do a more efficient and rational use that, together with the practices mentioned in the presentation, we believe it is a virtuous system. So you get an idea. Our predictive system, we have measured an indicator of environmental impact of phytosanitary products called E and Q, developed by the American Cornell University, which internally the last 3 campaigns were reduced by 50% by the reduction of the use of phytosanitary products. And if we compare ourselves with the average of the area, which is 60% below in the use of phytosanitary products, if we complement that reduction of the use of the phytosanitary products with an increase in the biological activity, which also helps and compensates for the degradation of these residues, we believe we are in a totally different system to the one we usually have in our heads, without mentioning that we can improve this relationship with the application of selective crops that can do great progress, and also the use of the nanotechnological formulation in the phytosanitary products. So I believe with that, I give answer to the questions. Thank you very much. Vinisa, there's a question related with a lab for analysis of fertilizers, which is whether or not you contemplate the analysis of the quality of biostimulants or biofertilizers. Well, Anna, thank you very much. I would like to thank your question. For the time being, we are analyzing and harmonizing protocols for fertilizers. And one of the conclusions of the symposium for Science for Nutrition was just that we need to assess the quality of biostimulants and the biofertilizers, and also recycled sources as well. And with that, we're going to start working on that this year and next year as well. And I would like to invite you to join us. Thank you very much. If you can write down the important data, just as the data that Ivan was saying at the beginning, so people can copy this information. So we close this block of Q&A. These very great answers have done by the audience members. To finish this blog, I would like to ask you two questions, and for that, we're going to be using the app we have. Please take your phones, and in your web navigator, go to the www.menti.com. This is the data in the upper part of the slide. Enter once you are in the link. Enter the code 95703251 to click in the submit. You can also enter to the navigator of your computer. So if you do this through this device, you can pay attention to the YouTube channel for those who are following this transmission, so you can also view the results of this survey. First question that we're going to be making is hoping everyone already enter the website www.menti.com, so you can enter the code 95703251. Before this, Dr. Ivan were being asked the reference of the wild wheat. If you can write on the chat on the YouTube channel as well. I'll just write it down there. So we go to the first questions of Menti. As you go to Menti, the number of the heart is going to be bigger. First question is, what percentage does a sustainable management of soil could increase the production of food? Options are 25%, 70%, and 58%. From this moment, you have 30 seconds to answer.
Por favor, se les invita a votar. Ojalá hayan entrado
Please go ahead with your voting. Hopefully you enter to the Mentimeter page, www.menti.com, and enter the code in the website up there. 10 seconds to vote. Most people pay a lot of attention to the figures that we were giving in one of our presentations. Very well. Very well then. As stated here, 71% of the participants of the questions of that survey, 58% was the right answer. With healthy soil and a sustainable system of management, we can produce up to 58% more food. From there, the importance of crops to be using latest generation fertilizers and non-mineral alternatives that not only will nurture suitably the soil, but also reduce the greenhouse gas emission that generate the use of conventional fertilizers. Very well. let's go to the second question. And for this, we're going to go into a situation. So question is, or situation will be, it will be hard to live without soil. Think how would be a day without soil in the earth. Mention 3 things you could not do. From this moment, we have again 30 seconds to begin with our reflections.
Nos quedan 24 segundos.
We have 24 seconds.
Muy bien.
Very well.
Van apareciendo las
As
palabras.
you can see in the screen, we have the words that we have had the greatest relevance in the opinion of our audience. About 700 people are participating in this event. We thank you for your participation in these topics. So we finished, and the time to give your answers, and definitely, as you said, we could not eat, we could not live, and we will have problems or have some impact in our quality of life, and as well people saying breathing. So we see how important soil is. Without the soil, nothing we do, we could do. So soil is a natural limited resource, and its role in food safety is crucial. Under the current scenario of climate change and the continuous degradation of soil, farmers are doing efforts to protect and conserve fertile soils. It is important to view these resources and adopt measurements that will contribute to the sustainable management to mitigate climate change. Soil is the base for food, forage, fuel, but also provides important ecosystemic services which are primordial for the development of the communities and human well-being. So such as the use of clean water, resistance to drought, carbon sequestration, and therefore its conservation could contribute to the mitigation and adaptation to climate change. Soil has become one of the most vulnerable resources in the world for climate change, the degradation of land and the loss of biodiversity. Soil is an important reserve of carbon, containing more carbon than the atmosphere and the land vegetation together. Organic carbon of soil is dynamic, notwithstanding the impact, the anthropogenic impact on the soil can turn it in a sump or a net source of greenhouse gases. We have achieved great scientific progress in the understanding and explanation of this dynamic of carbon in the soil. However, the protection and the monitoring of the carbon reserve in the soil at a national and global level still face challenges that hinder, that obstruct the design and the implementation of effective policies on the land that are adapted to the regions in particular. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you so much for your participation. We hope you like this tool. With this, we'd like to finalize this first block. Thanks very much to the attendees for your interesting questions and the panel members for the answers. In this space, we've seen that we've had a very enriching space. We have not been able to answer all of the questions or all of the queries you had, but we will try to get them to the presenters so we can answer the questions later. Also, I'd like to tell you that the recording of this event will be hosted in the website of the event, and they were going to have access to the presentations that we've been doing. We again have 850 participants by the different platforms that we're using for this event. I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. As I said so before at the beginning, we're going to have a break at this moment of 30 minutes. We'd like to invite you to watch the full videos, and we hope to have your presence for the development of the second block that will start in about 30 minutes, 25 minutes actually, for the conversation with the exchange of experiences. Let's go now to watch the videos. Thank you very much. keep the soil alive, protect biodiversity.
Ese punto distante y pequeño del
The
cosmos
distant and small point of the cosmos is the habitat of about more 2 billion species and the product of thousands of millions of years of evolution.
diversidad
Most of this biodiversity is in the soil under our feet. But up until now, we have only identified 1% of the species in the soil. This soil biota constitutes the greatest concentration of biomass of any part of the planet. And it is made by an unmeasurable amount of mega, macro, and mesoorganisms.
criaturas
Each one of these wonderful creatures play an important role in the trophic chain that maintains the fragile balance of life in the natural and farming ecosystems. If these complex interactions are interrupted, they can cause an irreversible impact for life on Earth, including human beings. Therefore, why do we need biodiversity in the soil? Soils keep very many unexpected secrets and do invisible work. Discovering antibiotics has had a great impact in the increase of life expectancy in humans. Soils have a lot of other medicinal functions and possible cures. Natural association between the roots of plants and the microscopic fungi promote better nutrition and the growth of plants, and also tolerance to soil pathogens and the climate conditions that are adverse. Through their natural function and metabolisms, the soil microorganisms are capable of breaking and denaturizing certain toxic compounds that are very pollutant that are resulting from many human activities. Part of the emissions of CO2 to the atmosphere derived from the industry and agriculture can be absorbed by plants and stored in the soil thanks to the breaking of... I'm sorry, I lost the audio.
Este valioso servicio proporcionado por los organismos del suelo.
This valuable service provided by soil organisms is key in the mitigation of climate change. On the other side, deforestation, monocrops, and the overuse and poor use of agrochemicals degrade and reduce the health of soils and decrease the resistance of pests.
Ponen en peligro el delicado equilibrio que tardó miles de millones de años en evolucionar y especializarse. No solo podríamos perder una larga historia natural de especiación, especialización, evolución y adaptación, sino también la capacidad de los suelos para realizar funciones ecosistémicas esenciales. ¿Cómo podemos restaurar, manejar y conservar algo que no vemos directamente y de lo que no tenemos pleno conocimiento? Es nuestra responsabilidad colectiva crear conciencia sobre la importancia de la biodiversidad del suelo, promover la innovación tecnológica para preservar y mejorar la biodiversidad del suelo, incluida la restauración del ecosistema. Reconocer la biodiversidad del suelo como un proveedor clave de servicios ecosistémicos y como una de las principales soluciones basadas en la naturaleza para hacer frente a todos los desafíos mundiales actuales. Invertir en
the most important aspects in the world, in addition to the compilation of knowledge on the status of the diversity of soils and its functions by region and the type of coverage on the soil, and to develop policies that are based on scientific basis to incorporate sustainable management of the soil and the conservation of soils with high biodiversity through the different landscapes. Everything that we eat and drink goes through the soil.
Ambientes sanos, personas sanas y una vida sana. Empieza por ti. Dale voz al sonido de un suelo vivo. Mantén al suelo vivo. Protege la biodiversidad del suelo. Biota constitutes the greatest concentration of biomass of part of the planet and is that distant and small spot in the cosmos is the habitat of approximately more than 2 million species and the product of billions of years of evolution. Most of this biodiversity is in the soil beneath our feet, but only 1% of soil species have been identified so far. This soil biota constitutes the greatest concentration of biomass of any part of the planet and is composed of an immeasurable amount of mega, macro, meso, and microorganisms. Each of these wonderful creatures plays a key role in the food chain that maintains the fragile balance of life in natural and agroecosystems. If these complex interactions become interrupted, it can cause irreversible impacts for life on Earth, including humans. So, why do we need soil biodiversity? Soils hold many unexpected secrets and perform unseen functions. The discovery of antibiotics has had a major impact on increasing human life expectancy. Soils hold many other potential medicinal functions and possible cures. The natural association between plant roots and microscopic fungi promotes better plant nutrition and growth, tolerance to soil pathogens, and adverse climatic conditions. Through their natural function and metabolism, soil microorganisms are capable of breaking down and denaturing certain toxic compounds and contaminants resulting from many human activities. Part of CO2 emissions into the atmosphere derived from industry and agriculture can be absorbed by plants and stored in soils thanks to microbial decomposition that may allow soil carbon retention for long periods of time. This invaluable service provided by soil organisms is key in climate change mitigation. On the other hand, deforestation, monocultures, and the overuse and misuse of agrochemical inputs degrade and reduce soil's health, diminish resistance to pests and pathogens, and cause biodiversity loss that jeopardize the delicate balance that took billions of years to evolve and specialize. We could not only lose a long natural history of specialization, evolution, and adaptation, but also soil's capacity to perform essential ecosystem functions. How can we restore, manage, and conserve something that we do not see directly, and of which we do not have full knowledge? It is our collective responsibility to raise awareness on the importance of soil biodiversity, promote technological innovation to preserve and enhance soil biodiversity, including ecosystem restoration, recognize soil biodiversity as a key provider of ecosystem services, and as one of the main nature-based solutions to face all the current global challenges. Invest in gathering better knowledge about the status of soil biodiversity and functions, including by region and land cover type, and develop policies based on scientific evidence to mainstream sustainable soil management and conservation of rich biodiversity soils across landscapes. Everything that we eat and drink passes through the soil biota over and over again. Therefore, we need healthy soils for healthy food, healthy environments, healthy people, and a healthy life. It starts with you. Give a voice to the sound of a living soil. Keep soil alive. Protect soil biodiversity.
Ana,
Dime. Sol.
dame un segundo.
Carbon dioxide is one of the key gases responsible for causing climate change. But healthy soils can be a strategic ally in mitigating and adapting to climate change. This is because soils sequester and hold carbon dioxide, preventing it from escaping into our atmosphere. There is more organic carbon in our soil than there is in our ground vegetation and atmosphere combined. Worldwide, 1,417 petatons of carbon are stored in the first meter of the soil. 456 petatons of carbon are stored in the above-below ground vegetation and dead organic matter. Organic matter plays a critical role in sequestering carbon dioxide. The higher the organic content of the soil, the higher its sequestration potential. However, soil degradation through deforestation, loss of nutrients, compaction, erosion and waterlogging, and urbanization cause our soil to emit greenhouse gases that contribute to global warming and climate change. But if we protect our soils and manage them sustainably, we can combat climate change.
in Colombia. Stefan, you have 5 minutes. Good morning to all of you. This project was developed now for a little more than a year, which are these are the conclusions and the elements I'm going to tell you about, and what has happened with this community in a lagoon in Colombia in the area of Fucini. This global mantis, as the name of the project explains, this is a project that has a problem of eutrophication. There's a lack of very important development of aquatic plants. The idea was to extract part of those aquatic plants, not all of them. It was an exercise of eradication. It was more linked to an environment and also a conservation of the environment. So we have recovered and cleaned about 12,200 square meters to free the area here. You can see the evolution of the project so that you can visualize of the impact it had from the before and after, and what are the principles to extract this organic material that this aquatic plants, when they die, they leave organic results. As other presentations were referred to during this dialogue, it can deteriorate the quality of water. We have been able, therefore, to recover 530 cubic plants of the aquatic plants that we have delivered to the interested farmers. You can see the images. You can note already the logistics. I would like to remind you that this was a community project. The idea was to have all the scientific input, but also to leave installed capacity to repeat these installation in facilities in future events. As been mentioned in other presentations, the importance is to know what type of farmers we were going to work with, what kind of soils. And before we continued in putting at disposal the organic material to the farmers, we took the prevention to carry out the soil analysis of before we began with the higher and lower portions of the farms. We had certain differences, of course, as you can imagine, both physical and chemical differences, which were notable. Here you can see an example of the work that was carried out for each one of these locations that were sampled. The analysis, both physical and chemical, of the certain area. All this information was made available, of course, to the farmers as a baseline for what took place in the fields. In this exercise, making available this organic material, there were various trials, not only to understand the compost, as you can see in the image, but also as a support for communication, and need that we had to be able to illustrate to interested parties or stakeholders how they could manage at the local level in a sustainable manner the organic material that was being extracted. This responds also to the different amounts of compost that you can observe, and it also responds to certain areas. We had a little bit more at the end, the supremacy of the antifolia and other sectors. In the front area, you can see papyrus, and we were able to demonstrate and compare to the stakeholders and farmers, of course, the interests, the importance and the difficulties, of course, of managing them also. In this sector, the more important case, there were other cases that after this dialogue, I can refer to this, but these were quite significant. This was a farmer that made available a land where he did not have a fast use and effectively had a problem of fertility of invasive plants, and the lack of organic material, of drainage, for example. And so there was a very important support with organic material. And what happened later of the soil analysis at the beginning, it has been made available to the farmer in how to manage organic material. And this was an integration process, which is quite superficial. You can see at the left-hand side, it was to homogenize the organic material, which was supported. This happened in an agricultural field that did not have use on the short term. I just want to show a last image. I do not want to go beyond my time because I wanted to underline something important in the lower part of this project. In the context of this project, of the eutrophication of the lagoon was recurrent, and 8 years ahead of us, they had carried out an operation that was similar and made available organic material. So in the framework of our project, we carried out analysis, soil analysis in the land where we also had significant results of organic material. We're able to carry out a comparison. It was in the last cells that I want to show you at the bottom of the image, a significant change in the humidity that could be taken and the apparent density of the soils. And here we had results from the physical standpoint, not chemical. Very interesting results. To provide this result in a more colloquial manner or easier to present, each square meter of the agricultural surface on this field had a humidity capacity of 40 centimeters of 10 liters of water every square meter. And after the integration of the organic material, it was increased to 25 liters of water for the retention for the same square meter. So it was a result that was very relevant, and it generates a resistance in the case of a drought, which is quite significant. This is important also to compare to other parameters for fast analysis, but in the same field, we had a parallel of this integration of this type of material and the taking into advantage, of course, the results. And of course, we have to indicate the pH. Thank you very much. I am available to all of you. I will stay within the range of my minutes. Thank you very much, Stefan. We will continue with the case that will be presented by Sergio de los Santos, who will talk to us about the power of the invisible, the impact of microorganisms on food safety. You can begin, Sergio. You have 5 minutes. We can't hear you. Please check your microphone. Yes. Thank you, Sergio. Thank you. First of all, I would like to congratulate the organizers of this dialogue for such an important fora to deal with such an important current knowledge, and also to thank this very kind invitation today. I would like to share with all of you one of the progress or developments that we have attained as a team focused on the use of microorganisms in agriculture. As have been mentioned previously, microorganisms in the soil play a fundamental role, so important to maintain life on the planet, and the ecosystems are not an exception. The microorganisms are in the recycling of nutrients, in maintaining structures of the soil, and to create the physical, chemical, and biological balance to mitigate the agricultural non-sustainable practices, for example, in the eutrophication, in its genetic and functional role associated to specific crops under climatic and erratic conditions are sustainable to contribute to food safety and security towards the future. Our team for some years now has focused in exploring and prospecting the microbian areas in specific areas in Mexico. One of them is where we find ourselves now in the Yaqui Valley, and these are preserved and prospected in a collection of microedaphica and which are current microorganisms, edaphic and endophyte, native, and these are from different agricultural areas in Mexico. These are associated to different agriculture areas in different areas because this interaction, of course, is specific. The plant microorganism and the environment in general is very specific. And to generate that effect, we have to understand what agrosystems are occurring under this area. This collection has an online platform which is completely open and that can be sought out to understand species, types, strains, genders and species and crops, so that we can transfer this knowledge to the farmer under different scenarios of different management of agricultural practices. And you can search them and you can see the potential biotechnological information. This is sustained in various studies and approximations, both microbiological, biochemical, genomic, and metagenomic, amongst others, that could increase the probability of success in the field under edaphic and endophic specific interactions, and also to preserve this microbian information and to understand how, through the modulation of these agricultural practices, they are undergo change, and also to increase the system so that it can become resilient, not only at the microbiological level, microbiota, but also in its meso area. Also, these are more than this is one of more than 1,600 of these strains that we analyze. As you can see on the left-hand side, it encourages the generation of biomass in the root, in the foliage, and how this strain has different effects depending on the organ of the plant or the portion of the plant that is inoculated. As you can see on the right-hand side in the inferior area, both microbiographies, these interactions then are different to what is happening in the flowage, which is the stomas. You can see that in the other area. You can also see ramifications in the bottom right-hand side. These are not radiculars. These are what the microorganisms are joining to the root, which do not generate the foliage. And it suggests very strongly that not only is it necessary to identify what and what type of the aspects of the plant that this can be inoculated, it plays a very important role in this interactions to learn the benefits. Given the time constraints, we will not share it now, specific details, but if anyone is interested, we will delightfully share the information once it is sent to the field. After carrying out metabolical analysis and others, this applied in the field, we realized that the inoculation of this bacterian aspects in wheat plants increases approximately from 10 to 15% the yield of wheat, about 1 hectare, with the 50% of this. This has an impact which are economic and positive for the producers and farmers, and also the conservation or preservation of the fertility of the soil, both physical, chemical, and biological, and reduces the non-sustainable use of synthetic fertilizers, as was mentioned before, generates GHG, eutrophication, accumulation of nitrogen, toxic nitrogen species. This technology is being utilized and migrated to agricultural farmers in general, about 350 hectares, where we analyze what microorganisms can be introduced to the agro system in the crop, in the practices, in the geographic and climatic environments in order to increase the yield, and using less agro products and reverting the negative effects which we have seen in the last years, which non-sustainable agricultural practices have affected the generation of food. And this is under which we develop these technology that are economically efficient and can be adapted effectively by all producers and farmers, whatever income level, the type of development. They must be fair. They has to optimize the natural resource that will not generate damage to the environment and reverts the damage already there, and it will have a function that is expected. To conclude, I would like to thank and recognize our team. These are young people that are actively participating in this and many other projects at our laboratory. Thank you very much. We are at your disposal. Thank you very much, Sergio. We will now go to our third presentation, which will be in charge of Manuel Valencia. We will be seeing the linkage of stubble use, carbon balance, greenhouse gas emissions, and crop growth for sustainable sugarcane production in the northwestern region of Argentina. Manuel, you're on.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Yes, perfect. As I was mentioning, we're gonna make a presentation about the management of mulch based on the balance of carbon and greenhouse gases without having a negative effect of the of cane plantations within the exercise, or because of its first progress. We have Julio Alfaro from Salto University, Hugo Fernandez from INTA, particularly in the experimental station, Jorge Chalco, Martin Aapresid, researchers from INTA and CONICET, specifically in the experimental station Salta, and in one way or another have contributed to the development of this activity. Within this, we start from this statement, which is sugarcane is one of the main sources of biomass and biofuel in the world. Production, which is forecasted, is that will increase. We have a trend towards raising this because the demand is growing. So in that sense, in Argentina, particularly, within a process of using harvest, we do we work with them with the stubble to use with energy purposes. So in that sense, we try to we think that the managing this stubble correctly will represent a risk for the sustainability of the soil. In a practical sense, we used an exercise of systems dynamics to draft the problem. We have a high production of biomass that in turn generates a high production of cane. This, in a way, will generate greater requirements in terms of energy for processing this. But also we have an availability of stubble that are still in the field. So while those residues of harvest are extracted from this batch and they're brought to a cogeneration plant, we can help to supply those electricity requirements. However, that has some implications in terms of cost and energy because it is affected on profitability. So what happens here? We have an alternative, and if we are removing this, we can just actually leave this double, but we're going to have a negative relationship. So we leave this in the field, we're going to have even less stubble to cogenerate. But leaving this double help us improve the conditions or the contents of organic carbon in the soil, which in turn will have an positive effect in the retention of humidity, the availability of energy for the development of microorganisms and others that have an implicancy as well in the relationship of carbon and nitrogen in the soil, but represents a risk for emissions. It represents a benefit for biological activity, but also for nitrous oxide emissions and a positive effect in the soil quality to improve these production qualities. In that sense, we set the exercise of setting what was the right level between what we're leaving and what we can remove for the cogeneration and what we would need. For that, we have developed this research, and we're developing this that corresponds to a region of Argentina, the province of Jujuy. There, specifically in these commercial batches, we have developed a block or designs as randomized where we have 4 treatments. Each one of these treatments corresponds to the percentage of removal of this double, which is 100% of removal, 65% of removal, 30%, and 0% of removal. So that has 3 replicas for the monitoring of greenhouse gases, and we have had the use of closed chambers. And in a way, we're going to be doing a monitoring in the stock of carbon in time. So therefore, we need to highlight this is a forecasted trial for 3 years, and these preliminary result only corresponds to 150 days of trial. What happens then? Within the results, so far, we haven't had any differences between the nitrous oxide emissions, but particularly, we saw that we had an alteration in what could be the trend of removal. So it seems to be that when we do 65% of the stubble removal, we have a balance between the processes and the biological processes of the soil that help us reduce emissions. So what does that mean? Starting from the fact that the emission of nitrous oxide is the reflective availability of organic nitrogen in the soil. And this is a result of the mobilization, the mineralization of this nitrogenous soil. We believe that when we remove 65% of these residues of the harvest, we're at such balance that it helps us decrease or have a high increase of immobilization, but rate of mineralization, which lead us to a low availability of nitrogen, which help us reduce emissions. That, however, is in the process. This is our first incidence, and what we're going to try to do is to prove this through time. However, in this exercise, we can conclude a number of things. One, we can start from the fact that we have preliminary results that is about approaching or infer that there could be a suitable management of the residues for the harvest, where we're going to have a product for using or the cogeneration of energy, but without having a negative effect within the impact or the stock of carbon in soil. But this is the monitoring of the evolution of organic carbon in the soil. We need to forecast this for the assessments in time, and we do a constant follow-up that will allow us to determine this. So based on the extraction of carbon, what I was telling you is that we can come to have a strategy of management that will allow us to decrease environmental impact, so without affecting production, so we can have the availability of the added value as well. It is necessary to continue with the follow-up of this exercise and this monitoring to be able to conclude whether or not here in this first exercise what we're presenting is the effect on the greenhouse gases. And we also need to be able to analyze the other components of the reset that are associated to carbon stocks. So in that sense, making the most of time, also wanted to use this space to thank the researchers, Cecilia, Mariana Minervi, and that are part of the research team, and also the founders of this product, part of the INTA, the program of Ledesma, Cliff Gratz, and EVCCIN, and also thank the organizers. Thank you so much. Thank you, Manuel. And we continue with interesting cases. Jorge Chalco will tell us our experience talking about aptitude of bacteria promoters of plants to reduce nitrous oxide emissions. This is a case study in sugarcane. Thank you, Jorge. You have 5 minutes. Well, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, we'd like to congratulate the organizers. And I would like to thank for the space and the invitation so we can actually spread this work. And in this case, the work I'm going to be presenting is called Aptitude of Growth Promoting Bacteria of Plants to Decrease the Nitrous Oxide Emissions in Sugarcane. Case study. Among the authors, we have the participation of different institutions. Among we can have the National Salto University, Los Llanos University, the National Institute of Farming Technology, the National Council for Scientific and Technical Research, and also the scholarship program. To introduce this work, it is important to highlight that sugarcane has a traditional management that is associated to the nitrogen fertilization with urea added in the soil. And it is known that this incorporation of these practices that are very rooted to this crop not only increase synthetic nitrogen that is available in the soil, but generate also an increase in the yields and also increase in nitrous oxide. Recently, in a study carried out by the Tucumán province in the northwest of Argentina, it showed an increase in the efficiency of nitrogen use, really decreases the accumulated emissions of nitrous oxide. So this led us to state that how can we increase the efficiency of this nitrogen? Basically, to increase this efficiency, we have two mechanisms. One, decrease the dose of fertilizer or decrease or nitrogen in the soil. And the other mechanisms to increase efficiencies to increase the units of generated biomass by units of available nitrogen. So this led us to set an alternative management so we can have greater biomass by units of nitrogen available based on the delivery of plant growth promoting bacteria. So this will allow us to have a lower availability of nitrogen that is synthetic in the soil. But it's not proven for this condition what effect it will have in the emissions of nitrous oxide in the yield and also in the efficiency. So the objective of this work was to determine the effect of PGPB in the growth, yield, and emissions of nitrous oxide compared to nitrogen fertilizers in sugarcane. This experiment was carried out in the province of Salta, specifically in the experimental Salta station in Argentina, in a trial in a semi-controlled conditions in a greenhouse. The treatments applied were 7, out of which 4 were with growth-promoting bacteria, One of the first treatment was the use of gluconacetobacter, PAL5 strain with nutrient, without nutrient. Another treatment consisted in the use of Pseudomonas and Azospirillum B with and without nutrients, urea, conventional urea with urease inhibitor, and control treatment without application. Those are the doses. This was used in a completely randomized study in microparcels in a greenhouse. Inoculation was done by immersion in the stakes. And for each bacteria, they had a concentration of 10 to 8. Then we did a re-inoculation in parallel at the moment of fertilization with nitrogen, which was approximately at 60 days after sowing with localized irrigation. What was assessed was the effect of these treatments in the population of plants and sprouts through the recount of total sprouts after 55 days after sowing. They assessed the coverage achieved 55 days after planting, and also the nitrous oxide emissions 1 day previous to fertilization and day 3, 6, 10, and 28 after fertilization with nitrogen. Results shown that in this image, we can see the dynamic of the population as the growth promoting bacteria and how they increased in the population of final sprouts, which was reflected in an increase of the coverage achieved. Regarding the nitrous oxide emissions, they observed that in general, all of the treatments with bacteria maintained emissions that were low and stable, while treatments with nitrogen fertilizers showed peaks of approximately 10 days after fertilization. It's very important and it's worth noting and stressing that we continue with the research to determine the impact of PGTBs in the yield component and also in the accumulated emissions. As a conclusion, we can see that the PGTBs improve the initial growth of the crop without external nitrogen, which mitigated the emissions of nitrous oxide in the analyzed period. We will require additional treatments to explore the interaction among rates, partial rates, and PGTB, and analyzing the efficiency of nitrogen use by crop per treatment. We'd like to thank many of the people who supported this work in the backstage, especially in the preparation of the inclinations as well. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jorge. Now it's the turn of Gabriel de Souza, who will present the case Yield, Quality, and Nutritional State of Cassava MMS cultivated in tropical acid soil in response to nitrogen and lime. Gabriel, 5 minutes.
Yes. Hi, good day, everyone. I'd like to thank the organizers for having me here, and I'd like to thank the audience for being a part of this webinar and discussion. Now, my research was targeted for food security and food sustainability. And in this regard, we wanted to reduce our import bills. We majorly import rice, wheat, and corn, and we needed to find an alternative carbohydrate source for the population. So in this regard, we decided to actually increase production of root crops, specifically cassava. Now, the local industry, cassava industry, faces many limitations. One, because usually there's a misconception with cassava in terms of its production. Usually farmers don't fertilize it adequately. So currently the average yields are approximately 8,000 to 10,000 kilograms per hectare. Now, because of this misconception, it has led to the mismanagement of the crop, which has obviously led to the inadequate soil fertility and nutrient management of the crop. Now, aside from the cassava itself, there are various abiotic and biotic factors that the local cassava industry faces. For one, we have to combat acid soils. So we had to find a way to manage acid soils, as well as most of the cassava production actually takes place on hillsides with heavy clay soils. This actual research was done on an alti soil. And then, of course, the usual pests and diseases that farmers have to combat. So what we decided to investigate was actually to optimize the nitrogen rate required for the crop. The nitrogen fertilizer used was urea, and we used various rates of this nitrogen fertilizer ranging from 0 going straight up to 400 kilograms of urea per hectare. And also to manage the soil acidity, what we looked at was the combined effect of nitrogen and limestone, calcitic limestone, of course, on yield and the quality of the cassava. Now, in this research, the quality that I'm referring to would be the post-harvest quality with regards to shelf life. So the actual method, meaning that it would have been done randomized and a split plot application, we would have had 2 beds, one with lime and one without lime. So looking at the results, as we can see with the increasing rate of nitrogen from 0 to 100, we saw double the yields. We saw over 20,000 kilograms per hectare with 100 kilograms of nitrogen being applied. However, a significant reduction was noticed after that with 200 kilograms of nitrogen. Now, a part of managing the acidity, we looked at pH. As we are all aware, pH is a major indicator of the availability of nutrients in the soil. So with the increase or the addition of limestone, we saw pH amelioration because most crops tend to thrive between 5.5 to 6.5. So because most of the time, those are the macronutrients available at those pH ranges. So what we saw in year 1 was an increase in pH as compared to the non-lime soils. And of course, in year 2, there was a further increase in the pH. Looking at the dry matter content. Now, usually when cassava is harvested, it usually does not have a long shelf life. And because of the fact that it doesn't have a long shelf life, it usually spoils and it has limited uses unless we can find some way, at least in the fresh produce market, to maintain that shelf life. So what we noticed was an actual increase in the dry matter content with the addition of limestone and nitrogen. As we can see for the first year, the dry matter content was not as high as compared to the second year. And last but not least, the occurrence of vascular streaking. So with the increasing rate of nitrogen, we saw there was a reduction in the post-harvest physiological deterioration of that crop. So as we can see there was a further decrease in the occurrence of vascular streaking up to 200 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. So I just want to conclude that what my study would have confirmed is the importance of pH amelioration, and it identified 100 kilograms of nitrogen as optimal for improved soil fertility, yield, crop nutrition, and post-harvest quality of cassava tubers. And what I want to make sure that one knows is that it's not just for cassava, but bridging the gaps, it requires particular attention with regards to soil fertility management and nutrient management. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel, for your presentation. And now we will have a presentation by Javiera, who will be talking about the repository of experiences and sustainable management of the COP soils. Javiera, the floor is yours. Thank you, Anna, for the introduction. First of all, I would like to thank all of the very large amount of people participating today. So thank you for being here. In December of last year, after the celebration of the International Day for Soil, we carried out this community for soil practices. We had various objectives, a collaborative community where we could integrate various partners and participate. In March, we carried out a new call for the integration of new people, and now today we have 652 members. We're delighted with this, and we're thankful for all of those that are participating and those that have dared and shared their experience. We made a call to generate a repository of experiences, and we have been able to have, and what you see on the screen, varied experiences that are related to good practices, fertility and soil management, the nutritional capacity of the soils in Latin America and the Caribbean, and also the nutrients, microorganisms, and programs that favor the management of soil and the quality of the nutrition. What you see on the screen, and we have been able to carry out a COPSOLIS, which was shared by the email that is sent to everyone, and refers to the management projects that are carried out in various countries. On this map, you can see 30 experiences. If, for example, I will show you one from Nicaragua. If you click on it, this is a collaboration of Madame Castillo, Xiomara Castillo, which relates to a project of agriculture, soils, and water to evaluate the effect of conservation, agriculture, and conventional system of physical properties on the soil. Here, you'll be able to see a summary of what the experience is about. You can access this information. You see an image that was shared by Xiomara, and if you click on the link, it redirects us to a summary of the experience she has had. You can qualify the experience and add comments. Our purpose with this collaborative map is that it continues growing. So we're open to receiving many experiences or all the experience. You can enter and upload them directly on this map or through the form that has been shared through the emails that we have sent through the soils community. And also at the end of this webinar, I will once again send you an email so that you can have all the indications and tutorials so that this community grows and this collaborative map grows. This is what I had to introduce to you. I hope you like this initiative, and for all of those that are participating, they would be knowledgeable about this. Thank you very much to everyone that has shared knowledge and information on this interactive map that will be beneficial to the entire region, and invite everyone that has not been involved to become involved so that we can disseminate this explicative and knowledgeable map. We will now have a round of questions and answers. Stefan, the first question, I would like to begin with you. The question is, which are the major technical problems that this experience had that you've developed in Colombia at the community level? Okay. There is no, this is not a project that was magical. We had many difficulties on the path and its execution. So it's very important to clarify that from the ecological standpoint, from the management of the lagoon, from the community standpoint, the people that are inhabitants of the area, the farmers could take advantage of the organic material that was extracted. There was a common goal. The quality was important from the tourism standpoint. The lagoon is very touristic location. People, inhabitants of the area, had a love for their land, their lagoon, and they were very interested in improving the situation. And the farmers, clearly, it is a dialogue, a perfect dialogue, that they were all interested in organic material. We must not doubt that for a minute. Now, what were the problems? Just in one word, not to extend myself most, it's the logistics. This experience has illustrated to us that the capacity to manage a micro basin, its lagoon, its production, and which is extreme of aquatic plants, requires a very refined or logistics. You have to work on the extraction. The farmers must know of the rhythm of environmental management of the lagoon, the production itself of the extracted organic material must correspond to the agricultural planning, of course, of the farmers themselves. This is important. And so that articulation amongst different farmers, and finally, those that carry out the activity, this must be understood, was a little bit complicated, was the weather, of course, the climate. When you have 7 or 8 tons of organic material, you cannot go in any land at any time. And thirdly, it might seem a little useless to mention, but we can put so much material, as you can see, all sorts of casings and fork machines, and so the distances of the locations of the harvesting of this material becomes a limiting factor. The distances, the areas, and it doesn't increase the amount of rotation or of cases beyond 30 minutes of transportation. The project in its logistic and economy is not viable. So we're talking here about a local experience of local development. And I want to insist on this, the territorial aspect, the agronomic aspects, I have mentioned it. Any farmer, depending on the volume they were interested in, they were all aware of the added value of fresh organic material or under compost. Stefan, another question. Considering those limitations or difficulties or challenges that this initiative had, what was the perception or the interest in the community to continue working on this type of initiative? So there's one aspect, I think the key aspect here was the capacity of local appropriation or ownership, if you will. This project put at disposal of this organic material for farmers could have been done with a much larger or more important machinery. It was with an external capacity outside of the territory. But I think what interested the municipality and the community is that finally what was shown is that it can be done at the territorial level. The control of the institution is very important so that you don't reach extremes in terms of extracting aquatic plants. But definitely this interest for the project had this local personality. So when people realized they had this organizational capacity, the capacity to respond to their needs, in the case of organic and nutrients, I didn't insist too much on that, but definitely the fertilization, the status of the soils, and what this organic material could provide, the interest was there. But when you generate it from within the community, this was by far the winning point. You cannot wait for a third party to come and intervene the lagoon, but rather begin a conversation amongst communities, farmers, and institutions in how to recover this treasure. Thank you very much, Stefan. Sergio, there are various questions. In fact, the first one refers to, is it viable, the extensive benefic use of microorganisms, starting from the fact that they are agrosystems that are different within the region? Thank you very much, Ana. Is it possible to know the person that asked the question? There is another question that derives from Andres Felipe Silva but in this one, I don't have the name. But what they want to know if they can have extensive use of microorganisms, considering the differences in the region. It is possible. It is a viable alternative, as I was stating previously. The objective is specifically is to define what is the problem we're trying to tackle. Each microorganism has a genetic and metabolic source, and it has a specific interaction with biotic or microbiotic objectives. From what we understand, and I said with great humbleness, that we have not discovered a microorganism that has the capacities of one microorganism to serve the problems or the main issues of agriculture. If we find a microorganism that has the capacity to biocontrol plagues or diseases, what type of diseases, what types of solidify phosphorus, for example, improve nitrogen, yield, increase quality of those generations, which are the characteristics of the soil in terms of texture, pH, nutrients, for example, the climate conditions. In summary, it is possible, it is feasible for an extensive use, in our opinion. We suggest considering certain specific, what is the problem that you need to solve, which are the climatic, geographic environment, what is the agricultural management. Not all species are the same in management of machinery, doses, or sources of fertilization. You need to identify the use of microorganisms that are regionalized, that allow us to maintain that natural capacity in the soils, because by introducing microorganisms from other ecosystems, it could generate perturbations or problems in the middle or short term because of the migration of these persons. It is possible, but we would need to be careful in certain points so that it is a sustainable alternative. And I imagine you would also need to keep into mind the time of inoculant that you're going to use, that you had this collection, but it is typified in each one of them and their use. Yes, exactly. Sergio, I am going to another question that Andres Felipe Silva has set forth, and it's the same one, has to do with the following. How much could fertilizers synthesis in the capacity of microorganisms respond both in esophagus and in the foliage? Thank you for the question, Andres. There are various studies that illustrate the impact, the high level of synthesis fertilizers in the community, in the microbian community. To learn and note the specific impact, it is difficult because, I repeat, it will depend on the doses that's used, the element that is being applied to, and the source, nitrogen, if it's ammonia, urea, ammonia, nitrate of ammonia, and so on. But there are certainly certain very well studied cases. The increase of nitrogen fertilizers reduces the population and diversity of nitrate fixing microorganisms. And it has impacts in other communities and other genders that are not specifically because of the application of these fertilizers, but rather the incorporation of these fertilizers, synthesis fertilizers modifies chemical aspects of the soil, and as a consequence, modify this microbian community. So the impact can be direct. The fertilizer could impact the microbian community, or indirectly, that those fertilizers modify the chemical the chemical aspect of the soil. And we know that the introduction of high doses of fertilizers can affect the pH of the soil, the electrical effects of the soil, and this has an impact that is quite broad on these microbial communities. Therefore, we would have to understand that, and that way to have an inference on the impact on those communities. However, if you seek to know specifically, you would have to carry out a study. There is no current manner to predict the effects on microbian communities. Thank you, Sergio. With that response, you respond to another question that Magis Rosa states. I will write because it complements what she's asking, which is the fact, which are the species of endophytes that are affected by this is something that needs to be studied specifically to each one of the microorganisms. If you want to complement, that's fine. Basically, something that has been taken into account in the previous one in bioinoculants, or depending on each one of the countries of the people that are listening to us, you have to consider that we cannot generalize here those inoculants and the effectiveness. It will depend on the gender, the species, and the strains. Not all strains, for example, of Bacillus subtilis or Trichoderma harciano, have a biological activity that is similar. So we cannot assume that an inoculant will have a strain of Bacillus or Trichoderma can have a specific function. Each one of those strains has interactions or ecological effects that you would have to analyze. So the impact on endophytes or endophiles, they maintain themselves in certain ecosystems. Those genders will have the capacity to tolerate factors that are abiotic, but the presence of these genders have to do with the function of these genders. We can find them, but not necessarily seeking the biological activity. So robust studies allow us to infer not only the presence, which is done with metagenomics, but also the function. Thank you, Sergio. Manuel, there is a question for you, and it's the following. If you prove that your hypothesis is real, which would you believe is the first limitation on the generators of sugarcane that extract in the entire analysis, or in Colombia, where you're from, respond to the recommendations of your study? Basically, the exercise is based is that the stubble is an added value to the production. It is a manner to capitalize it through cogeneration, and there are benefits or the implicances that it has, or the negative effects that it would have, that the stubble would have. Cane has a high level of biomass production and has an extraction of nutrients from the soil. So there's going to be a trend in reducing the stocks of each one of these components. However, by accumulating a high doses of residues, it will allow us to check on the fertility, the retention of humidity, and improving recycling of nutrients, improving the conditions to microorganisms that will allow us to keep this humidity on the soil. It's to quantify these effects, both positive and negative, in the extraction. Not only geared towards the added value in economic, from the economic standpoint of the cogeneration through waste. In Colombia, it is a completely different scenario because the index of cane is much higher than in Argentina, which means that from what is left from the cane, there's enough biomass to cogenerate and other uses, as such as the production of paper and other products. And in this manner, it allows you to be able to generate the collection. In Colombia, it generates a very high cost, which doesn't require the extraction of that. It's very different in Colombia than it is what is taking place in Argentina. Other ways of not generating a negative effect in the soil than that which is being generated. Thank you very much for your responses. Jorge, there are various questions for you. The first one which are the advantages and disadvantages in the use of the bacteria that promotes vegetation or material.
One of the advantages is that these bacteria don't have just a single mechanism to favor this generation biomass in plants. As the colleague was saying, the one who presented on bacteria, there are multiple functions that are characterized for each bacteria, even at a strain level. So one of the main advantages is that one strain not only can contribute to the improvement of plant improvement by one mechanism, but several, be that direct or indirect. So that means that there's not only a benefit in terms of nutrition, but also a benefit in terms of the fight against other pathogen microorganisms. So another benefits associated to the generation of phytohormones. And for those in the plant, for those who end up generating greater biomass at a crop level. This is one of the main advantages, but it will make us present, at least partially, of what is these inputs of nitrogen fertilizers or others with a lower environmental impact. Thank you very much. And there's another question, Jorge, by Andres Felipe Silva. He asks, why didn't you use nitrate sources in the study where you assessed the PGPR to reduce nitrous oxide emissions? Well, in a preliminary study, we assessed the ammonia nitrate as an option to nitrogen fertilization with urea. And in this study, we observed that one of the main lines or controllers that regulate emissions is the availability of nitrogen. And this availability is given by the synchronization we have between demand by the crop and also the supply given by fertilizing. And also it's going to be given by the source or the chemical formulation where we have nitrogen. So, and ammonia nitrate is what is directly incorporated nitrogen in the way of nitrate and ammonia. And this means that while this is immediately available for using it in plants, we also have it immediately available for microorganisms that remove nitrate from it, issuing nitrous oxide. So there's it is key to understanding the interaction not only of this way of nitrogen with the microorganisms, but also with the physical chemical properties of soil. The final analysis in the nitrous oxide. And one step we want to follow is to combine nitrogenous sources with bacteria to measure the emissions and the efficiency of nitrogen use in the crops. That is something that we need to do still. We thank you very much, Jorge, for your answer. Gabriel, we have questions for yourself as well. And the first one is, what advice would you give to producers for the efficient use of nitrogen fertilizers?
What I would advise is that they take into consideration the 4 R's, which is the right product, which in terms in using slow releasing nitrogenous fertilizer. So you would have used either urea or ammonium. Of course, I want them to take into consideration the right rate. We don't want to misuse or overuse fertilizers. because the higher the rate, the greater the likelihood of emissions. So we want to ensure that you use the optimum end fertilizer rate, followed by the right timing. Timing of fertilizer application is very, very important. It is important that it coincides with your crop's changing demand. So usually you want to ensure that you time it properly. And of course, the correct placement of the fertilizer. You usually don't just throw fertilizer. It has to be applied correctly and very close, well, not too close to the root zone, but in an area where it can move to the main root zone for assimilation. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle. And there's a second question for you, which is based on your experience. What advice would you give to the producers to manage sustainably acidic soil?
I would like them to pay particular attention to liming. pH amelioration is very, very important for acidic soils. Of course, the use of adequate rates of fertilizers and organic manures. You have to pay particular attention in terms of use. In terms of liming, it is also good that you do it judiciously, that it is not overuse or misuse. So a lime requirement test, I always tell producers, and before any planting can take place, that they have their soils tested. So it's not wasting fertilizer as well as wasting money, which of course wasting time and labor, and of course harming the environment.
Thank you very much, everyone, for your answers, and especially for the more than 1,200 participants and attendees who have been listening, what you as panel members have been kind enough to share with us. And also would like to thank them for the active participation in the chat. As you know, we are using the hashtag Soils for Health and Soil for Nutrition, and we'd like to thank everyone who has been coming and commenting on social networks on this event. In this way, we're closing this Q&A chapter, and also we'd like to thank our panel members and our participants, and we'd like to give you a preview of the third dialogue we're going to have that we are foreseen for the 21st of September, which is linked to the fact of the public policies that are related to the sustainable management of soil. And in that sense, I would like to reply to one of the questions that have been asked to me in regards of whether or not this is the moment for starting to move joint efforts to have an extensive impact on the conservation of soil. And in that sense, this effort has several branches of purposes. First is to view soil as an element which needs to be catered for, and also which is necessary to care and treat as a base element for the production of our food, and with a base element for the ecosystems and agro-ecosystems. The other thing that is important, and in line with the conversation that we have next, is the fact that this is a space, hopefully, for creating awareness on the importance of public policies as a catalyst for the positioning and the scaling of the measurements of adaptation and mitigation of agro-ecosystems, starting from that basis, which is soil. And also, hopefully, it is also a space to view all of the tools and all of the information, all of the expertise that the region of Latin America and the Caribbean have in this topic. And hopefully that will be useful as an entry door to have an incidence in the agendas of the ministries of agriculture, which are the ones that mandate the work to be done in the soil topic, everything related to productive ecosystems. So with that, we'd like to also invite you to the third conversation oriented to policies as a need to design, hopefully, new policies framed in a long-term vision. And those are the ones that imply this type of effort to differentiate policies and coherent policies to the different realities of the region, different territory conditions, and different types of producers and ways of production. But also, this is a space, this conversation, hopefully, to see the need of integrating public policies in a way such that the management of these ecosystems and the management of natural resources and soil in particular is treated holistically and in an interdisciplinary way. But also, hopefully, this is an engine that makes the design of public policies more dynamic, and also the public investment and decision-making processes based, as we have been saying in this conversation, everything should be evidence-based. And for that, the role of the academia, the research centers, and the ministries of agriculture, among other stakeholders, as the ones we have here today, becomes so relevant. Also, we hope that this conversation is a space to reflect the need of anticipating and assessing and addressing the impact of public policies, and for that, the need of the monitoring system, and also for the planning system of knowing what do we do, what for, how we do it, what's the impact, and this becomes even more relevant. And finally, we hope that this dialogue linked to the public policies will reflect also a need of finding a strong institution that is based on regional relationships that hopefully will channel the cooperation as we have been doing so with the practice communities in these conversations, and hopefully will also channel the international financing for efforts that will articulate the different sectors and will have a better impact on natural resources and the agro-food systems at every level, from local to national to regional. And finally, I would like to start closing this, and not without remembering you that this recording will be lodged in the page of the event. We're also going to have the different presentations that we are going to have by the different panel members. Also, I would like to say that in the different pages of the other conversations and webinars that we do in June, they're also available for you. But if you want to review the different presentations and the materials that you have been doing. So with that, my dear friends, I would like to remember that this dialogue should not be left here. We wait for you on the 21st of September in this conversation of policies that we're implementing in the region, and hopefully to promote and scale these alternatives for sustainable management of soil. And as I was saying, in the website of the conversation, we're going to be sharing all of the information linked. So I would like to also close this day to say goodbye and invite you to join to the soil practice communities, to the sister communities of family agriculture and agroecology, to continue feeding that digital map that is gathering the experiences that you have been having and you have been sharing. So this is a public good for all of the information that all of you are managing. And we wait for you in the upcoming events. And also I would like to close by thanking all of the organizing team of this event. Be thanked, and all of the 1,200 attendees. Thank you as well for joining us. Thank you for joining us, and let's meet back on September 21st.